The last method for solving quadratics is called the quadratic formula. The thing about the quadratic formula is it works for every single quadratic as long as you correctly identify the correct a, b, and c values. But it works 100% of the time. You need to memorize this formula down here, which is the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of everything b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So if I have this quadratic 2x squared minus 3x minus 12, 2 is a, b is negative 3, and c is negative 12. And so the first step is to put everything in the correct spot. So I color-coded it for you so that you could see. Since I have a negative 3, the opposite of b would be a positive 3. Then I have plus or minus. Here I'm going to put b, which is negative 3. Notice I'm using parentheses because anytime you square something in your calculator, you need parentheses. Minus 4 times a, which was 2, times c, which is negative 12, all over 2 times 2, 2 times a. So the very first step when you're doing the quadratic formula is after you put all your numbers there, you need to figure out what's underneath the square root. So I needed to figure out what was b squared minus 4ac. What is this part of the quadratic formula? So when you do that in your calculator and you can type that whole thing, you get 105. Then I'm going to figure out what is 2 times 2 on the bottom, which is going to be 4. From here, like most quadratics, it's going to cross twice. So I'm looking for 2 answers. And the 2 answers are going to come from this plus or minus, just like it did when we were doing completing the square. So what you're going to do, just like before, is make 2 separate problems. You're going to take 3 plus the square root of 105, and you're going to take 3 minus the square root of 105. Notice I have parentheses around the numerator so that when I'm typing this whole thing into my calculator, I'm getting the correct answer. So I have parentheses 3 plus the square root 105. Get out of the square root, close the parentheses, and then divide by 4. So you're going to get 2 answers. And these would be the 2 places that if I were to graph this quadratic, it would cross. So it's not hard, it's just putting everything in the right spot and calculating it correctly on your calculators. So here I have the steps for you in terms of everything that I just talked about. And it's got to be equal to 0 first, just like when we were factoring. Then you fill out your a, b, and c values into the correct spots. Then you figure out what's underneath the square root by doing b squared minus 4 times a times c. Then I figure out what is 2 times a. Then I'm going to split the problem into 2, make it 1 equal to the positive square root and 1 equal to the negative square root. I'm going to figure out the numerator, which is the top, and the last thing I'm going to do is divide by the denominator. So let's look at one more really quickly. If I had 3x squared plus 5x plus 1, I'm going to put everything in the correct spot. Notice I have a plus 5, so the opposite of b is to put a minus 5. Plus or minus, I'm going to have 5 squared minus 4 times 3 times 1, all over 2 times a, which is 3. So the first thing is I need to figure out what is this 5 squared minus 4 times 3 times 1. And so that ends up being 13. And then I'm also going to figure out what is 2 times 3, which is 6. From here, I'm going to split the problem into 2 different problems. The negative 5 equals the positive plus root 13, and negative 5 minus the square root of 13. Then the last thing I'm going to do is divide by 6 and end up with 2 answers. Again, these would be the answers where it crossed if this happened to be graphed. The last thing I just want to point out is the special case. Sometimes that happens in that you do everything correctly. It's just when I'm done figuring out what b squared minus 4 times a times c is, I get a negative number. And so what does that really mean? Well, you can't take the square root of a negative number. And so what's happening is you once again have a quadratic that actually doesn't cross the x-axis. So you can verify if you did it correctly. If you're unsure, your calculator is going to say error when you try to type this in. And also, if you were to graph this, you could see there are no x-intercepts. So that's the quadratic formula.